Hello and welcome back to another exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. Tonight we are continuing our series on the heroes of Asatru, and for the first time we have folk builder Ali Clausen joining us. Top of the show stuff, we're getting close to Sigurblot at Sigurheim. We would love to see you guys there. Anyone listening to this show, or if you know folks that should be there, let them know. If you are a member, awesome. Contact your folk builder. They can tell you everything you need to know. If you are not a member, you should fix that, but also contact your local folk builder and they can get you vouched for and taken care of. We'd love to see you guys there. It's going to be an awesome event. I am pretty excited, looking forward to it, and that's the 22nd of this month in Jackson County, Tennessee. As my wife reminds us over there in the chat, if you like this, please like it, share it, and subscribe. It helps our algorithm. It helps to get us in front of more eyes that might want to be part of what we're doing and want to hear the message that we're talking about each week. We are being broadcast live on Entropy, YouTube, VK, Twitter, and Odyssey. So please feel free to join us in any of those places and ask your questions. Like us, subscribe, and share us there too, and tell your friends. Also over on Entropy, if you guys want to do any donations tonight, those are always appreciated over there. Or over here, rather. That's what I use when I'm looking at the program. And if you guys want to participate in our super chats, you know, for a little donation, your question gets to the front of the line. As always, we'll answer all questions that come to us as long as we've got them. Also, just so you guys know, and for planning purposes, next month in August, we are having frith at Baldershof. That's the national event for the Baldershof district. It is going to be a great time at an amazing Hof with amazing people. That is particularly hard to read that Nick just put up there, so perhaps he could, I don't know. I'm even trying to read it, and I find it a little bit difficult myself. I think it says August 18th through the 20th. Again, if you can make it, that's in Murdoch, Minnesota. If you're a member, talk to your local folk builders. They can get you the information you need to know. If you're not a member, you should fix it, but you should also talk to your local folk builder, and they can get you squared away if you want to attend. Also, in August, and I hope Nick's got a flyer for this, there's an event going on in Texas that builder Justin Day is hosting that he's pretty excited about. I know some other folk builders are helping him get that all set up. So waiting on Nick, but if he's got a graphic on that, hopefully that's cool. If not, JDAY at runestone.org is for the host of that, and he can get you guys more information. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ali, and she's going to tell us about Alexander Rud Mills. But first, and I always try to do this when we've got a first-time guest on the program. Ali, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself and what you do for the Asatru Folk Assembly? And could you also tell people how you came home to Asatru and to the Asatru Folk Assembly?
Okay, so I'm Ali. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I'm an apprentice folk builder for Baldershof District. For Baldershof, I help run our welcome wagon. So if you join Baldershof District, you'll get a booklet that I will send to you with all sorts of goodies and info about the Hof and the people there. In addition to that, I run the Sister Sunday Chats every Sunday at 10 a.m. Central, and the book study, which we're running, or a book club, sorry, that we're running just about every other Sunday at 4 p.m. Central. Right now we're reading Le Morte d'Arthur and working our way through some of the Arthurian legends. In addition to that, I help put together the Runestone newsletters that you'll see every month, and a whole bunch of other stuff. as needed. So I found the Asatru Folk Assembly in 2016, right after I married Cody, and I tried so hard to get him to join. So hard, but it was just, he had jobs with government clearances, and he was worried about all sorts of, the misinformation that's out there. And then you guys started doing this broadcast, and that's what ultimately got him on board with joining. I guess you and Swan sitting here for hours is better than a wife nagging. So I think it's really cool to be the last first guest on the first year, because it's just such a full circle moment for us that this is what brought us home, and now I'm on here, so this is really cool for me. I've been at least some flavor of pagan my whole life, whether I knew what that meant or not. My dad took me to a pagan pride druid festival when I was about 9, and as soon as I realized that was something I could do, it sparked it. Everything fell into place then. And Cody introduced me to the term Asatru, and that finally is what felt right, and it really made sense for me.
Well, that's great, and it's one of many success stories that I think we have through this program, which is awesome. I'm so very thankful that people appreciate this program, and we've got such an active fan base, and that it sounds like it's brought a lot of people home, and I think that's really cool. You do tons of stuff. Some of you guys may recognize Ali from the chat because she is consistently over there in the chat window, contributing to the program and asking meaningful questions. She's one of the ones towards the end of the show that I can always count on populating a bunch of the questions and keeping Swan going for an extra hour or so.
I try to stump you guys. I really do. And I think I've got it a couple times.
Well, no, that's great, and I'm glad to have you and Cody on board. And I'm not sure whether you mentioned it or not, but you guys are in Nebraska.
Yes, sir.
For anybody interested out there, anybody who might find themselves in the Nebraska area, this is your local folk builder. Can you tell folks about Alexander Rud Mills, assuming that they've never heard anything about him before?
Okay, so I kind of want to break up the Alexander Rud Mills stuff into biography of the man and then a little bit about the church that he ran.
Okay.
So Alexander Rud Mills was born July 15th, 1885 in Forth, Tasmania, which is an island off the coast of Australia. As a young man, he moved to Melbourne, Victoria, to go to law school. That was sometime around 1910-ish. The dates vary a little bit depending on the source. But regardless, he studied law in Melbourne. He graduated in 1916. He passed the bar in 1917 and became a barrister. He was fairly successful in that business, having spent years teaching law as well during his later years at school. He was rejected by the military at the outbreak of World War I for medical reasons, and that kind of spurred him to do more public service through his law practice. Anything really that he could do to replace that military service. In 1930, he was put forward by the National Party. He did not win that nomination. He did not win any political seats then. So in 1931, he kind of went into a self-imposed exile and decided to travel the world. He traveled to South Africa, which he did not enjoy. He traveled to the USSR, where he was already against communism, and that's where he became an anti-communist. He said that, Russia will cure any communist if you put him to work there. During his travels, he also went to Germany, where he claims that he met Adolf Hitler. There's not a whole lot of proof for that story, but it did get him in trouble with the Australian government later. And during his time in the UK, that's where he met a lot of the men that would form the early parts of the Odinic Rite, and a lot of his contacts that would become important to disseminating his books later on. In 1934, he returned back to Australia, and that's when he founded the First Anglican Church of Odin, which was heavily based on the Church of England, the actual Anglican Church. And in 1935, he founded the British Australian Racial Body, which was his political movement that did not take off. He was arrested May 7th, 1942, and held without trial for many months. He wasn't released until December of 1942 because they felt like his travels through Germany and his rave reviews of his time there, in addition to his Germanic paganism, was a threat to the Australian sovereignty and to the Australian war effort. So he was held without trial, without charges, and he alleges some horrific abuses by the government at that time. And after his release in 1944, he was officially charged with, retroactively, they said he was arrested for providing legal service to political dissidents. In other words, he had friends. He was married in 1962 to Evelyn Price, who he had known through all of this since he had returned from his travels in Europe. He was 65, she was 62. She was a school teacher. They, of course, had no children due to their advanced ages, and he passed on April 8th, 1964, and he was given an Odinic rite at his funeral service, despite being buried in the Church of England section, where he was buried next to his wife. Now, a little bit about the First Anglican Church of Odin was inspired by Meister von List and a lot of his writings. They believed in a very different form of the religion than we would recognize today, with Odin as the chief deity and the other gods as a almost like a saint-like figure, where you could pray to them and then they could take concerns to Odin, as opposed to being gods in their own right. He believed that Christianity was foreign to the British people, which he believed that the British people were any people that we would recognize as our folk living within the bounds of the British Empire. That was his chief concern, was bringing those people to Odinism. He believed in Odin as a sky father deity, and mainly sought to remove Judaic influence from the Church of England. And his services, his hymns, he had full proper services. This wasn't some backyard stand around the fire reenacting stuff. It was based heavily in the Church of England, and I think that really paved the way for modern Asatru being based in today as opposed to 1,000 years ago.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the bit you threw in there about his experience of the world as a young man and his travels, because I think that was very formative in, I don't know, the influence that he had later on. So let me see what we've got for questions. We're still using kind of an improvised question method here. So let me see what we've got. First one I've got is from Brandy. Hail all, looking beautiful. What made you want to become or Hail Ali, I'm sorry. I misread that. I didn't see a little dot. My eyes are getting old. Yes, Ali, looking beautiful. What made you want to become a folk builder? And how did you get so awesome?
Well, thank you, Brandy. I'll start with the end there. I became so awesome because I've got a great mentor in Brandy and my folk building mentor, Ashley McStalker. They're both fantastic. But I wanted to become a folk builder because I just saw that gap in Nebraska. We wanted to do things. We didn't want to have to drive 300 miles to Baldershoff. We didn't want to have to drive, to either coast to go do more things. So, if you want something done, do it. That's really the best way. I just wanted to, help other people be able to have an experience in Asatru and to give myself an experience in Asatru.
All right. Our next question from Kevin. Matt, have you heard of the Old Norse fighting technique glima, which stands for glimpse or flash, because it was a fast-paced use of throws, blows, kicks, chokes, locks, pain techniques, and weapons? I have. To my understanding, it's pretty obscure, and figuring out and finding folks that are expert in that is hard to come by. But yes, I absolutely have heard of that and seen various videos of people doing some of the techniques. Our next question comes from Witten Daniel Young. I'll share your Gothi. What was the motivation behind having Mr. Mills as the hero of Thorshof? So some of you guys may not be aware, each of our Hofs is not only dedicated to one of our gods, but they have kind of a patron hero that we set up an altar for there as well. And we'll continue doing that with each of our Hofs that we get, assuming that we have recognized heroes to put there. And then if not, we'll put them there once we get them. So one of the things, it was really important for me early on as Alsharier Gothi to recognize Alexander Rud Mills with his own Day of Remembrance as a hero of our faith. He is one of those kind of initial pioneers of modern Asatru that started from zero to something. And, I've always said the biggest distance to overcome is the distance from, the couch to the front door, is overcoming nothing and doing something. And everybody waits for that first person to take that first step forward so they can follow behind them or so they can benefit from what those people build. But it's lonely as a pioneer to start something brand new and try to build something where there's not anything. And he's part of that, small handful of people that did that. The other thing that really spoke to me is he didn't go through a pretend Viking phase. His rebirth of Asatru, the way that he did it, the way that he founded it in Australia, didn't have a period of Viking LARP to it at all. It wasn't confined to some ancient time in the past. It was from day one, from its conception, a modern faith based on modern practices by modern people. When you see pictures of him doing things, he's wearing a suit, he's dressed like an upstanding gentleman of his day. And that was very appealing to me. And I think that's something interesting to harken back to. I think a lot of people now think perhaps that's a very recent development in Asatru, and it's not. It's something that he was doing in the 30s and the 40s. And I've always been inspired by that. Anybody that reads a lot of his works will recognize, the big differences between how he sees our faith and how we see our faith. But I don't think enough people realize that it's part of a transition and part of a process. He was one of those first generation of people trying to bridge the theological gap between the Christianity that was very prevalent in our folk at the time and for centuries, and getting back to our native faith. And no, it wasn't perfect, but it was a really special start. There was a lot of great things there, and a lot of, it set a lot of foundation that I think is really special. And so much of his work was about that breaking away from a Christian mindset into embracing the faith of our ancestors. My daughter wants to apparently show you her purple headphones, and she's excited about that. But yeah, that's why Thorshof was the first Hof under my administration. So it was very important that I wanted him to be honored there, because I have a personal admiration for him. And I felt like that was a good statement to make with the first Hof done under my watch, was to honor him in that way. And that was at a time where we were just adding modern heroes to our days of remembrance. Before that, all of our heroes that we were remembering were, almost all of them were taken from conversion era sagas of Norway, from the Heimskringla and they were confined to a very early period in time. We did have Radbod from earlier and Arminius from earlier, but all of our heroes were very ancient at that point. And I wanted to acknowledge our modern Asatru heroes for what they did to build the faith that we all get to celebrate and enjoy today. So that was really important to me. Our next question we have, this one's for you, Ali. How many books did he write?
All right, so I'm gonna have to refer to my notes here. As Tasman IV in 1933, he wrote "And Fear Shall Be in the Way," which is a political book. As Alexander Rud Mills, publishing under his own name, he published 5 books. Hail Odin in 1934, the first guide book to the Anglican Body in 1936, Ritual Book of the Moots of the Anglican Body in 1937, The Odinist Religion on Overcoming Judeo-Christianity in 1939, and Call of Our Ancient Nordic Religion, Reflections on the Theological Content of the Sagas in 1957, which seems to be his most well-known book. And in 1947, he wrote under the pen name Justinian, Law for the Ordinary Man, which was a book of legal advice for people that might find themselves in situations such as he had been, where he was persecuted for his beliefs.
All right. Next question from Cody. Ali, what virtue do you think that Alexander Rud Mills most embodied, and what lessons can we learn from his story?
I would have to say fidelity is the virtue I would think most describes Alexander Rud Mills, in that he was imprisoned by his own countrymen without trial, without charge, without any knowledge of when he might be freed, and yet he didn't turn his back. It would have been very easy for him to agree that, the Church of the Crown, the Church of England, was just fine and dandy, and he was going to believe in that now, and he was going to believe in, the party line of whatever political party would have got him freed. But he didn't. He stood proud in his convictions, and he stayed strong in his belief in the gods, and he just, took that, turned that into strength, and did great works and right action after he got out.
All right. Our next question from Sarah. What was the name of the book that Alexander Rud Mills almost completed before his death? Ali?
I do not have that in my notes. I'm not quite sure about that one.
Uh-oh.
I apologize for that, Sarah.
So I don't know if that was a gotcha or an actual question, but I would be really curious to know the answer to that if anyone out there does know.
I know that at one point Stubba had several unfinished manuscripts of Rud Mills, but those were lost in the mishandling of his estate. So there's apparently a ton of stuff that is lost to history, and some of it is lost on me. I must have missed something.
So that is another reason that it is very, very important to me to preserve our history, to acknowledge and celebrate these heroes of earlier times in Asatru, and do what we can to preserve what we still do have. Because the problems we face now trying to find this information is, those problems will be much greater in the future unless we take steps now to preserve those things. One of the things that's very hard for people to realize, and I've encountered this with the McNallans, it's most often we don't realize that we're living history as it happens. We only see something as historically important when viewed decades into the future. And when that's the case, we lose a lot of things. People who were there aren't with us for a variety of reasons. If we wait long enough, a lot of those people have passed due to old age, but sometimes they pass due to other reasons. you lose information, you lose dates and names and places, and the more we can stop that and record things, the easier time it's going to be for people, 60, 70, 80 years from now to look back and see the things that we were doing and learn from the lives that we're living now. So the next question, which of his books would be a good first read? What do you suggest, Ali?
Now I've only read through Call of Our Ancient Nordic Religion, but I would highly recommend that. It's got a lot of really good information, a lot of good thinking points about the various sagas, which, I mean, some of them are quite a slog to get through by themselves. So if you've got some points of reference that, hey, this is really good here, keep an eye on this section, that would be something that I would recommend. The other stuff, it's mainly focused on a defunct religious body that's so different from ours that it's not a waste of time, but it's not the best use of time.
Yeah, I think that's the starter book that most people have read by him. So that's what I would recommend. I certainly haven't read all of his works, but of the ones that I have, I think that's the most accessible. I also think, so we have, and it's very special, at Thorshof, at the Alexander Rud Mills Shrine, we have a copy of Hail Odin, an original copy that he sent as a gift to a friend of his in England. And it has a letter that he typed up on his typewriter from his barrister's office and signed, that he sent to his friend there along with the book. And it's special to have a piece of history, a piece that he actually touched, that he personally sent as a gift, along with a letter that he was personally signed and was responsible for. But reading through that, it's different because it's not now I'm trying to think of what the word I want to use for the distinction is. As a book, it is a book of his poems as opposed to an instructional book about Asatru. It's his poems that are inspired by our faith and inspired by the Allfather. And the poems are really kind of cool, and it's neat to read through those. But yeah, I think either of those works pretty good as an introductory thing to get you kind of familiar with where he was coming from and his mindset at the time. Next question. Ali, tell us why you like folk building and the extra groups that you are a part of on the side.
So we have a kindred here in Nebraska, the Prairie Fire Kindred. They call me their den mother. So that's one of my major groups on the side. The Sister Sunday Chat, which I thought was really important to take over from Whit and Callahan. That used to be Coffee and Crochet. And unfortunately, she's such a busy woman, it couldn't be as often as some of us wanted it to be. So we made it that often. I do a book club, which is meeting now just about every other week. We're going to be 3 weeks into it coming up. And there's a couple other things. The Baldershoff Rune Study, which will be starting back up very soon. And working on the runestone is my other real big project on the side. And all of that was so important to me. And becoming a folk builder was so important to me because I wanted to help bring people together. I wanted to build a community and friendships with people that were thinking the same sane things that I was in a world that's a little bit insane at times. It's hard to find people, so it makes it a little bit easier if you can bring them together.
And that's something that's been really nice to see, and it's developed very organically, is a lot of the groups that our ladies have to build friendships and relationships within the Asatru Folk Assembly. it's been a really nice thing to see the last couple of years, and I appreciate all of you that are taking the lead in weaving that frith in that way. It's invaluable, and I think it'll be that way for generations. So our next, okay. Last week, there was a question about trans people being accepted in Asatru. Wasn't that tried with Loki, and it helped bring about the end of the world? So to clarify, the position of the Asatru Folk Assembly is that the transgender phenomenon is absolutely a devastating and tragic mental illness that is unfortunately being used and propagated for political messaging by people with very deviant agendas. And there was a difference last week. And so we do not recognize or allow people who are currently engaged in that mental illness into the Asatru Folk Assembly because it is very destructive and dangerous for our children and for our group as a whole. And we hope those people get the help that they so desperately need. The issue last week that was getting talked about was a difference between that and actual biological hermaphroditism, if that's even a word, but folks that genuinely have that genetic mutation to where they have that confusion of parts. And that was a complex discussion. The thing with our lore and discussions on Loki about this that you rightly pick up on, yes, he was the example of what not to do, of the dangers of having chaotic, deviant elements in your kin fence and in your circle and the damage that causes, and an example of things that we want to align ourselves in opposition to. It wasn't just the issue of his gender fluidity that's in the lore stories, but that was an extension of his overall malignancy and chaotic nature, and his destructive and deviant tendencies that stood in the face of order. And that was a big part of that. So yeah, you pick up on our lore is not favorable of that because of Loki. Next question. Do you know where Mills's final resting place is? Ali, do you know where that's located?
Yes, it is in Victoria, Australia. He is buried next to his wife, and if I could read my handwriting, I would tell you exactly where that was. I apologize, I cannot read my handwriting.
All right. And some of you guys may see me fiddling with my phone. It's because I was trying to get an exact location for that and what cemetery that's in. Because we do, and we've actually had Australian members that have gone and done rituals at his graveside. But search for that continues. Our next question. The mishandling of an estate and the loss of materials that Ali mentioned is also a good reminder to make sure our wills are done and properly recorded, wouldn't you say? I would say that. And I would, this is as good a time as any to mention doyourownwill.com. And however you do your will, we want you to send an original signed copy. You can have several of those to our law speaker, Alan Turnage. Producer Nick is putting that up on the screen so that in the event of your death, we are able to advocate for you to make sure your wishes are followed in terms of your estate, in terms of the handling of your remains, of any funerary rites that you'd like. We have seen far too many people in the Asatru Folk Assembly pass without having a will in place. And because things default to next of kin, a lot of us have Christian family members or family members that may not take what we do very seriously. This has resulted in a lot of really unfortunate circumstances when it comes to what's happened as far as people's funerary rites, as far as where their body has been interred or handled. A lot of those things have been directly contrary to people's wishes because they didn't have anything in writing. We found a way for you to do that. I'm trying to get as many people as I can to do that. It's not, it sounds odd, like I'm trying to sell you something. I'm not. I found a free place to do it online so that cost isn't an issue. Anyone in the United States certainly can do this, but also places in Canada. It's doyourownwill.com. Again, producer Nick has that up on the screen. It's really easy. I did it. It takes about 10 minutes, but it's very, very important. And not just for elderly people or people who are ill, but, life happens and unforeseen circumstances happen to people at all ages. I've seen so many people in the Asatru Folk Assembly over the years not have that in place when it was needed. And I can't stress this strongly enough, and I appreciate your reminder, Nick. I hope people listen and take you up on that.
I did just double check. Alexander Rud Mills is buried in Fern Tree Gully Cemetery in Melbourne.
There you go. Our next question. Do you think Ragnarok has already happened, or will it happen, or will it happen at all, or could be a metaphor for something that could happen in the real world? So this gets discussed semi-frequently, I'd say, and it's an important point within the Asatru Folk Assembly that we believe our lore takes place in mythic time, which means, to your question, Ragnarok will happen, is happening, and has happened. And I understand that's an odd thing to wrap your head around, but our lore takes place in mythic space and mythic time, and that doesn't conform to the same rules that linear time does in Midgard, in our human existence. And it teaches us a lot of lessons, and it teaches that in terms of cycles. So I don't think that it's got, a fixed date on that. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is the idea of being ever vigilant and prepared for an impending conflict, for an impending doom, but also having hope and knowledge that things can pass beyond that and come back to fruition. We see that with Baldur's Return. We see that with Lif and Lifthrasir. We see that with the survivors of Ragnarok and the sons of the gods coming back and resetting things right. But again, I think that's a cyclical lesson that's taught in mythic time and doesn't have a linear location that we can, look to it as, aha, this is occurring. I think we see that cycle again and again, and we can recognize that or see metaphorical truths in that every time we face a calamity or a cataclysm. Aha, this must be the Ragnarok that the lore talks about. And I think we pick up truths in that, but I don't think that's true in the literal sense. So I hope that sheds a little bit of light on your question. But again, I think that takes place outside of our conception of time. Ali, which is your favorite Futhark? The elder, the younger, the Anglo, or the Armanen?
I would have to say the Elder Futhark because that is just the one I'm most comfortable with. I've only recently learned a little bit about the Armanen, and I don't really know anything about the younger or Anglo-Saxon Futharks.
All right. Matt, as someone who practices jujitsu, what are your thoughts on HEMA or Western martial arts in general? Would you ever consider trying it? So, first, it depends on what that is or what that looks like. I think that a lot of us, when we start out, we wish there was a European martial art that was as good or has some kind of equivalency to Asian martial arts. And that doesn't exist. We try to retcon ones like Glima or like Pancration or things that way. But realistically, as a modern system of hand-to-hand fighting, the Asians have that figured out better than we figured that out. If you want something completely Western, I mean, you can learn boxing, which is very valuable. There's things that are very valuable, but as far as what people are looking for in a martial art, I think you're going to get that through the Asian systems much better than you're going to get that through HEMA or other European attempts at it. The thing that is fun about HEMA that I'm aware of is you get to figure out through use archaic weapons and how to use them, and it's cool. Like, I think it would be fun to do, and as a fun exercise, or as, you know, something to do to gain a better historical understanding of how to use medieval swords, I think that's a cool thing to do. It's absolutely something that I'd love to do for fun or for, you know, competition with my friends or with others. I think that's a good thing. As far as it being useful in a confrontation, just on a practical sense, it is dependent upon archaic weapons that you don't find yourself having when you need it. One of the benefits of most of the Japanese and Chinese and Korean martial arts is that most of them are mainly focused on hand-to-hand. There's obviously schools that teach, you know, there's various sword schools and all kind of different weapons that get trained in martial arts, but it's got a really solid foundation of hand-to-hand things, and you always have your hands and your feet with you. I think that teaches you something that's a lot more practical. I think if people are put off by the Asianness of some of these things, obviously mixed martial arts training incorporates, you know, the most effective martial arts training that we know around the world and puts it all in one package. And I think that's a really solid thing to do if you're put off by the Asianness of a lot of martial arts. But I don't really see him as being a particularly effective fighting technique tool. But I do think it looks like a lot of fun. And if I had friends that were doing it, I would love to do it. I think it's fun. I think it would be great athleticism and something cool to do with your friends to get a workout in and to do something that's very, very interesting. The next question is for both of us. What would you say, and I'll let you go first on this, Ali. What would you say is Alexander's biggest contribution to modern Asatru?
I think I touched on it a little bit before. I think it's just taking it out of the Viking Age and putting it into something that we can understand and we can respect and move forward with, without having to wear bear pelts and, you know, eat mutton legs over the fire. We can bring this into the real world. We can, you know, do what we need to do to move forward, teach our children, and also fit into American society day to day. You
stole my answer realistically, I think that's absolutely the case. The biggest contribution is from day one, he conceived Asatru through the eyes of a modern Englishman who was, English transplant that found himself in Australia. But he found it completely relevant and useful for his life in, the 20th century. And that's really kind of a thing. Or kind of an amazing thing. All of the other modern pioneers of Asatru in some way or another have had to go through a Viking reenactment phase, either physically or intellectually, in how they conceived of our faith. It was really special that he had the wisdom and the insight not to have to do that, and to realize that this is a real viable religion, and our gods are just as relevant for us as modern people as they were for people in the Viking Age or, times gone by. I think that is the biggest contribution. Somebody over in the side mentioned that, wasn't he quite monotheistic in his understanding? Yes, absolutely he was. Because again, it was a transition. He was in a time in society where people were first very, very religious, much so more so than today. Today in Europe, religion as a whole has decreased to a shocking level. And it took a few more generations in the United States, but like in my grandparents' day, everyone in the United States was religious. Not saying everyone, obviously not, but the vast, vast majority, church was part of their life. In my parents' day, depending on what part of the country you're in, still a majority of people. In my day, less. In people a generation younger than me's days, even less still. But in his time, everybody was religious to one degree or another. The society was entirely made up of Christianity, and his steps to breaking away from that, he avoided the whole throwing out the baby with the bathwater thing, to where anything religious, anything Christianity does, we have to completely throw it out and start fresh with caveman stuff and shoulder pelts. He didn't do that. He decided to, okay, well, this is religion. This is what Western people practice as religion. What would it look like if it was Asatru? What would it look like if it was our gods? And that's the direction he came from. And his understanding philosophically, he couldn't, at that point, he couldn't open his mind to true polytheism in the way that we understand it today. But the steps that he made were first steps on a longer road. And, he never made it to the end of that road. But the fact that he made those steps is extremely significant and extremely important. And the fact that when he saw the God of his universe for the first time in a very, very long time, it wasn't a Jewish God. It was one of our gods. It was Odin. And from there, he built his faith around that. And it was such an important first step that I think we all take for granted, but it contributed hugely to us being here and having this conversation today.
Well, and if I can step in there for a second, I think it also helped that he knew his audience. He knew the people that he was talking to. The working class white British man wasn't ready to completely shed the 500 years of Church of England. They had so much pride in their heritage and their roots that it would have been just a bridge too far. He would have been absolutely crazy to do that right away.
I think that's an important point too. He didn't feel the need to have the shock value. I think a lot of people in other instances, and we still see today in the pursuit of Asatru, people when they come home to Asatru feel this need often to go through this rebellious phase where they, throw out anything that is normal, respectable social behavior in order to show how pagan they are. And it takes time and maturity for them coming back to integrating what it means to be a noble person in our day and age and practice Asatru. It's amazing to me that he bypassed that altogether, and that was another really special thing about him as a visionary. Matt, could you see bloat being done for our heroes? Is that a common practice? If not, why isn't it? I think that's a question of semantics more than anything else. Offerings are made to our heroes quite often. Bloat is done to our ancestors in, like, when we bloat to the Alfar, when we bloat to the Disir. You could do a bloat to a hero, absolutely. I don't think it's typically done because we usually use that type of worship for gods and not for people. But I think some of it's semantics and customs. I think a great many people honor and worship the heroes on their days of remembrance or at different times in their homes. I would like to see that practice done at Hofs more often. I think that it's something that hadn't been emphasized in Asatru for a really long time. So I think it's something that's taken us a little bit of time to reintegrate. I absolutely think that religious rites should be performed for our ancestors and for our heroes. But in terms of bloat the same way we bloat to the gods, again, I don't think it's bad. I just think it's different. And I think that delineation is kind of important. It's always really, this is something in modern Asatru that I think we need to focus more on and refine our thoughts on. There was a current of thought for a long time by, I don't know, almost an atheist element in Asatru, that our gods are some kind of deified heroes and that they're people that attained godhood. And that's not the case. I don't know where that came from. I'm not sure if that's from the euhemerized accounts that Snorri makes or just what. But it's really important that we acknowledge and recognize that our gods are gods with a big G. They're a completely separate, elevated, they're not, this is one of those things that we lack the words that we need for the clarity that I want to express. They are a completely different order of being than humans are. Certainly you can ascend to something better, and we believe that our heroes have ascended to something better, something closer to the gods than we are currently. To be able to go to the halls of the gods and feast with our gods and share with them in a closer relationship and a closer status than we have. But the idea that our heroes somehow become gods in the same sense isn't the case. There's a big difference between a celebrated hero that ascends and can commune with the gods in a closer way than we can, and the storm god of our folk since the dawn of time, or Odin, who crafted humanity, or who crafted Aryan humanity. Recognizing the difference in order between human and God is very essential for us to be pious and religious people and not see the gods as our big homies in the sky. That's not, it sounds silly. And yeah, when I said it, I made it a little bit silly, but that's because the idea itself is silly and absurd. But it's one of those things that when we went through the Asatru rugged individualist, I don't kneel before my gods phase, we had that that bit of heresy built into our mind at some point. We need to make really sure that we shed that and that we acknowledge our gods for gods. It's one of the things with the word worship. I know worship makes some people uncomfortable because of how they've seen it practiced in different faiths at different times. But the word itself is our word, and it means worthship, to recognize worth, to assign worth to something, and to acknowledge the worth of something. We need to acknowledge the worth of our gods and their value and the different order of magnitude that value is compared to our heroes or our ancestors who've ascended. Recognizing accurately the worth of individuals that we are honoring is fundamental to that concept of worship. And it's really important that we do that. All right, next question. Will the AFA store be back up? Yes. Or when will it be back up? Yes, absolutely. It will be back up. We are figuring that out behind the scenes. We are currently trying to get a hold of the remaining stock of our merchandise that the previous store owner still has in their possession. Once we have that, we'll be able to put it back on the store again. Or if we have to start fresh and restock, we'll know to do that. I want that process finished and ready by the end of this month. I would love it to be ready quicker than that, but something will be done and mentioned by the end of this month, because we do need to get that back up and running for folks. So hopefully sooner, but at the latest, we'll know something and have something put out to you guys by the end of July. Allie, it's good to see you here. What are your 5 favorite books, not lore related?
Geez, that's a really hard one. I would have to say the All Souls trilogy, which is a girl answer, but I'll stand by that because I am a girl. It's a historical romance, and they're fantastic. If you like vampires, it's great. The Septimus Heap series, which is for children, but they do stand up as an adult. They're fantastic. Unintentionally very folkish. I love them. I'm going to read them to my kids when they're old enough. I read this bizarre book as a child about a kid who turns the TV on after the station sign off for the night, and he sees lizards playing saxophones. So lizard music, I thought it was a fever dream. It's also incredible. I collect old cookbooks, so I'm going to have to use a cheater answer and say old cookbooks are some of my favorites. And Forbidden Archaeology. It's a book about things that are just found in the wrong place. You know, they don't make sense, just alternative history and that sort of thing.
All right. Also part of the same meta question that this is, what is your favorite saga?
Does the Grimness Mall count as a saga? Because that is my answer.
No.
No, okay. Volsunga Saga. Okay. Cheater answer again, but it's a good one.
Counts. All right. And what is your favorite food recipe?
Oh, geez. Not my favorite one to make, but the one that goes over best in my house is something called a runza. It's a Nebraska specialty. So I enjoy making those because I enjoy feeding them to my family. It's a yeast roll that's got cabbage and ground beef baked into it.
That sounds awesome. All right. And your favorite romantic movie?
Oh, geez. See, I'm not a romance fan in terms of movies. I can give you like
about those books.
Okay, but it's not a movie though. I could give you 100 horror movies I like. I don't like any. I've never seen a romance movie I liked. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Fair enough. Okay, so the next question is kind of the first part of that question with the add-on of what are you reading currently?
Currently, I have been looking through. I just finished rereading The Shining, which is incredible. The movie's good, but the book is so much better. But right now I am just flipping through all of my old recipe books and trying to just condense them down, my favorites, into one notebook. So I guess that's what I'm reading right now.
All right. So folks, we have only been on for an hour. There is no problem having a brief episode, but if you guys do have questions, please throw them out there. We'll give it a couple of more minutes here to generate any extra questions you guys might have. But yeah, if you guys got questions, please throw them out. If not, we'll sign off early tonight. I will go get some dinner and spend some time with my wife and child before they go to sleep, if that is the case. One thing that I do want to point out about Alexander Rud Mills that I think is important is that he stood up for his faith and his beliefs, his worldview for our folk at a time where it wasn't popular to do so. And he faced consequences for it. His time during the Second World War, where he was in an internment camp, that's significant. There were ways that he could have gotten out of that by renouncing our faith, by disavowing our folk and his beliefs for our folk. And he didn't take the easy road. And it harmed him professionally. You know, he was trying for a political career. He was a gainfully employed barrister. He had things going on that he paid a very real price for. And it's something to keep in mind and to be inspired by. One of the things that I'm constantly reminded of, and I constantly want to continue to beat the drum on, is that this is a real faith and we need to take it seriously like a real faith. So many of us have gotten very used to our associations and our things in our life being casual and disposable. And a lot of us have lived so comfortably, myself included, that it's the idea of facing consequence is terrifying, even when the consequences is pretty small in comparison. We have so many people that are scared to put their real name behind what they do, or to put their real name behind their association with Asatru Folk Assembly, in a vague fear that they might be doxxed at whatever job they may have. And that's terrible. And I sympathize with those folks. Please don't get me wrong. But it's hard when someone like Alexander Rud Mills put himself out there and he was, willing to be a prisoner in his own country for a time, absolutely sacrifice his career and the life that he had going for, a period of years, because he was proud of his faith. He was proud of the church that he had founded, and the idea of disavowing his faith would have been unthinkable to him. Or to kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, keep it private, but say the right thing publicly would have been such a great dishonor to him that it wasn't even conceivable. And
I think that really is his legacy. If I can jump in for a sec, I think that really is his legacy, because you see, a decade after his death, you've got a group of students from his alma mater going and petitioning the government to allow them to practice and demanding that they would not be persecuted, because he really was persecuted. And that fight lasted 20 years until members of parliament finally allowed a freedom of religion, and allowed the Odinic Rite of Australia to even be recognized as anything more than a cult, as they called it.
Yeah, I think that's something that we all can learn from. And one of the things that I think is so special about relatively modern heroes we need to remember with all of our heroes that they were men and women that existed just like us. They were, white Aryan Homo sapiens, just like the rest of us, the same skull structure, the same brain capacity, the same feelings, the same capacity to love or to hate or to feel pain, to endure hardship, and to bear those things. And when we look at them in a completely different age and a different time, it's easy not to consider their personal struggles as tangible. With our modern heroes, when you see a picture of Alexander Rud Mills, he could be any of our, great grandfather. He's wearing a tie and modern clothes and doing modern things and, writing books. And it's much easier to picture yourself in his shoes or him in yours and relate to the life he lived and the things that he dealt with. You can't view with the same indifference that you do folk in early medieval times or in, antiquity when they went through hardships, because it's harder to relate to those people. But to relate to our modern heroes and what they did, I think it's a much more tangible ideal to hold yourself to. He wasn't a Viking. He wasn't out, battling lines of people with an axe. He was a very, modern man of his age, trying to hold down a job, trying to do the same things that so many of us do. It's very much apples to apples comparing yourself and your life to things that he went through and trying to hold yourself to that same standard of integrity. Honor wasn't a foreign concept of chivalry. Honor was not disavowing the things that he deeply believed just because it would help him, not nodding and going along with, saying the right things politically to salvage a career, not living in a false way in order to, somehow have his cake and eating it too, being willing to suffer persecution for the sake of our gods and to still hold his faith and hold strong. I think I'm beating a dead horse on that, but it's something I want everybody to internalize, and I want us to, do that. And I hope that we get to do that by these episodes. I hope they inspire people to read up on our modern heroes, to take an interest in these people in their lives. Asatru is a real thing, and we live history every day. There are folk among us who will be celebrated as heroes in generations to come. Hopefully we make ourselves worthy of that, but we generate heroes for our faith all the time. And we live in a very special time to where we have those opportunities to become heroes of our faith. We live in a time where we are just seeing the fruits of the resurgence of our faith. We're just developing hoffs. We're growing. So much is happening, and Asatru is so dynamic right now in how it grows. Each of us can have such a huge impact on how that grows and develops on the future of our faith and of our church. There's so much we can do now and so much opportunity to be the heroes that are celebrated in the future. And it's something I want everybody to keep in mind. You check and see if we have generated any last questions. Think we have. We have. Whoa, we really have. We've got quite a few now. All righty. Ali, what is your favorite music genre?
I listen to everything but country, but if I had to choose one thing to listen to for the rest of my life, it would be 80s Euro pop. Strange, off the wall answer. I'm sure y'all don't expect it of me, but Aha is 10 out of 10.
Fair enough. Next question. Where to meet Asatru girls and women. What is your advice for single men involved in Asatru on how they can find an Asatru lady in their life?
Join the AFA, come to our events, impress the married women, and we'll set you up.
That may not be the fun answer. I think that people are really spoiled by hookup culture. I think that, there's no AFA Tinder for you to swipe stuff on. And what is happening, though, and what Ali points out, that's how these things work. In a society where we're living with our folk, in a folk community, the women get together and they talk, and people matchmake, people help people get together, people kind of feel out who'd be a good match for who. And if the women in the community value what you bring to the table as a man, they're able to do some of that legwork for you to sell you as a potential mate. And that's really special that we're at a time where we can do that. One of the things that I would say is don't allow geography to be limiting to you. I know that that's difficult if you just want to date or something casual in your life, but if you're trying to find someone to build a life with and build a family with, geography can be overcome. It's not easy, but very few things that are really worth it in life are. Through the AFA, you can build lasting and amazing things. And I say it every week because it's true. It happened for me and it made all the difference. I wasn't, when I was Asatru, even when I was in the AFA, I wasn't always with Mandy. I had a number of girlfriends before then that, maybe they were sort of accepting or, they were, at least not some other faith. But finding a woman in the Asatru Folk Assembly is a whole different life. And it made literally everything better. And we couldn't have been farther apart and still be in North America, but it worked. We've got a 3-year-old baby girl now, and it's beautiful and it's special. And it's a real thing. It's not the only example of that in the AFA at all. So it certainly can be done. How is everything going with Sigerheim? Things are going fantastic with Sigerheim. I don't know if you've been paying attention to some of the announcements on events. I usually do that at the top of the program, but we're fixing to have our first big annual national event at Sigerheim. It's going to be Sigur Bloat at Sigerheim. This is the first one, but every July this is going to happen from now until forever. It's a little bit rustic right now because we don't have a lot of infrastructure out there. We're still getting some of those things set up. Sigerheim does have a mailbox now. There's a mailbox where we're getting mail delivered to. We've got one semi-permanent shed area there on some gravel that's been brought in. We are moving and shaking. It takes a while to get services set up because there is quite a backlog on that, but we're working on it. We're going to host our event out there here on the 22nd of July. I'm going out for it. I'm very excited. Things are moving. We've got several families that are signed on to move out there when the situation is right, and we're looking at that. Believe me, I'm bothering folks daily on that because I'm itching to move out there and make it happen. It's developing, and honestly, it's developing faster than I thought that it might. We're still in, we got it towards the end of December, so we're not even a full 7 months into it yet, and we already have 2 people that have moved out there, and we've got more coming. So Sigerheim's going fantastic. Ali, when are you going to start watching 90s and early 2000s pro wrestling?
I'm not against it. I'm not against the idea. I guess whenever Cody decides to buy me a movie projector, we got rid of our television because we watched too much television. So it's on Cody at this point. So bug him, please.
All right. What are your 5 favorite horror movies?
Okay. So I'm gonna have to count The Shining. I love The Shining. Chopping Mall is incredible. 1987, they get stuck in a shopping mall with RoboCop type Roombas that start killing people. It's great. The Ice Cream Man. That one's fantastic. Ice Cream Man goes nuts. Starts combining his love of ice cream and corpses. They're all pretty great. Tourist Trap. Guy starts making wax dolls out of people that stumble into his tourist trap. And last one, I'd have to say Demon Wind. Guy goes to investigate his grandparents' farm, finds out it's full of demons.
All right. Ali, how do you balance everything you do for the AFA and family time?
Carefully. Very carefully. A lot of times I'm doing 2 things at once. I know I've been on many, many phone calls and many meetings while I'm making dinner or doing something else. A lot of times, I've got the kids on one side and I'm, updating MeWe on the other, making sure that my moot posters are put together while while Finn's doing his homeschool. So it just, so it's a lot of balance. It's a lot of, sometimes my house isn't, clean enough to invite the King of England, but it's clean enough that I can do other stuff right now.
I gotta find where I was at. Cool. All right, there we go. Will you guys ever sell physical copies of the Odinist or the Runestone in a compilation? And are they available to print out for free? Runestones, yes, you can print them out. We've got the runestones, every runestone that we have access to and can find on our library section at www.runestone.org. And you can certainly print those out. I don't know how printer friendly the file is. We've talked about that. And I know that James Alt is working on compiling Odinists. I'm not sure what form that's finally going to take. As far as selling like a physical compilation of the runestone, I don't know. I'm not opposed to it. The idea has been talked about a little bit, but it is accessible. The library as we have it is accessible for free at our website. And I would encourage everybody to go back and read those old editions. I scanned a lot of those in myself, and it was fascinating to just read those snippets of time and place of the development of the AFA and of Asatru, even earlier than that, back in the free assembly days. Any update on Sigerheim or other people being added to the list of heroes? Well, I updated you on Sigerheim the best that I've got for right now. As far as folks being updated and added to the list of heroes, we've added 3 people this year. We added, well, first we added, and we discussed him 2 weeks ago, Sveinbjörn Björnsson, the founder of the Asatru Félagið in Iceland. And we celebrate his day of remembrance was actually yesterday. We have also added Hoskold and Stubba of the Odinic Rite each have their own day of remembrance as pioneers of our faith as well. John Ewell and John Gibbs Bailey. So We have done our episode on Hoskold earlier, and we'll be doing one on Stuba in, I don't know, a few weeks.
August. About a month. It's Cody's episode. So
there we go. Then in about a month. Appreciate the save on that. This is the first year that we've had these days of remembrance, so I've got to check back on the calendar often until I get them kind of internalized. This one is for me. Alzhir Yogothi. What is the most important thing we can do to ensure future generations of Asatru produce great heroes of our faith? So this is a complex answer because there's no just one thing. The big thing is to internalize Asatru and the Asatru Folk Assembly within your life and within your family. To raise your children in this in such a way that Asatru and your membership in the Asatru Folk Assembly is a bedrock of your family's traditions and development, is something that your kids learn from as early on as you can teach them, that this is an integral part of their life, so that this is very, very deadly serious to them and not something disposable as so much in our modern world is. So it's not treated as a smorgasbord of just kind of pick and choose what religion you want and where you want to go and what church you want to do. We build heroes by this being life or death, what we do. Internalizing that within your family to where your marriage and your children are built and structured with that in mind is how we're going to raise those heroes. For your kids, having this as their religious touchstone from the earliest times that they can conceive of it, and seeing our priests as connected to our gods, seeing our church as connected to gods that they absolutely believe in since they were born, that's what's going to enable them to stand strong as heroes for this later on in their life. When this is a generational institution and not a hobby or a club or, a political accessory, when this is a genuine faith that they see their parents practice with piety and with reverence and take deadly serious, then those are going to be the heroes of our future. And we're working hard on that. Getting kids enrolled in the Asatru Academy is a huge part of that, so that this is a fundamental to the way that they're raised and educated. But yeah, the answer to that lies in how serious we role model this for our children. Not how serious we tell our children this is, but how serious our children witness this being in our life. So I believe this question is for you. Do you like any movies or TV shows based on Norse myths or history?
I can't say that I do. I tried to watch Vikings and it just kind of annoyed me. So it was too LARPy and not really into that sort of thing.
I think this one's to both of us. What is your opinion? And I'll have you answer this first. What is your opinion on how our myths are relevant in our lives today?
I think there's just so many general lessons and general themes that you can apply to so much of your life, whether that be, your own life or parenting or your job or anything like that. There's so many truths and the virtues, especially seeing those lived out is definitely relevant and will always be relevant. They're timeless themes.
It's a thing I think that as I said earlier, our myths take place in mythic time. They're no more relevant in the Viking Age than they are now. The way they were written down in the language and the points of reference with, day-to-day things is obviously from that time period, but the stories are just as relevant to us today as they were then. Most importantly, our myths lay out the basic foundation of who our gods are and ways that we can recognize and associate things with them. Building a faith with our very real and very living gods is the thing that's always relevant and is reinforced by going back to and rereading and re-understanding those myths. Ali, what is a personal goal you have within the AFA?
Personally, I would like to see Nebraska hit 20 or 25 members. I know there's the interest. It's just a matter of getting in touch with these people, reaching out to them, bringing them home. I would love to have a big, strong community here.
How has that been going for you in Nebraska?
It's been going really well. We have a nice core group that is just, they're awesome people. Our kindred is just fantastic. I love getting together with them. I love doing stuff with them. And that's saying a lot because I'm such a homebody. I don't really love to socialize. But with my AFA family, it's so much different. It's so much easier. So, just having them bring their friends into the fold and, put us in touch with people who might be interested. That's our next step.
Looking over in our chat, and something that's really, really kind of special is we have, can't tell the gender, I was going to say a guy, but we have a person in Australia, in Fern Tree Gully, where Rud Mills is buried, on the chat tonight.
That's really cool.
I think that's really special. And thank you, AM, for joining us this evening. Daniel asks, Alzheri Gothi, can you explain pious reverent devotion and its importance? So I've already harped on this quite a bit on this show, but I will always take the opportunity to harp on it more. I think it's fundamental. And it's worth us all going back to and re-looking at every now and again. I mentioned this in my Runestone article this month, and that should be coming out. Hopefully that's coming out tonight. Piety and reverence are an active thing. And if you do them long enough, they become passive to where that is your habit. But initially, and it's worthwhile for all of us, but especially initially, it's something you have to build into your personality of who you are and what makes you tick. We are Asatru. Asatru literally means loyal to the Aesir. The focus of our faith, of our church, the AFA, and of how we live our lives and define ourselves should be in large part aimed at the gods and not at our buddies or at other things. I think it's really important to stop and consider. And I've seen this even, with Gothar when we're doing a bloat. Everyone, and I'll admit I've I think this myself sometimes. You wonder, man, how was that bloat? Did people like it? Cool. It would be great if people did like it. But the most important thing, if I'm doing an Odin bloat, is how did Odin like it? If the people liked it, that's a cool bonus. But if the people hated it and Odin loved it, then cool. It works and it was a good bloat, and it's everyone else's problem besides mine and the Allfathers. And that's not to say that's the case. genuinely, worry's not the right term, but I genuinely am concerned every time, wanting to make sure that the bloats I perform are well received by the God I'm bloating to. It's not about whether the people there liked it. It's great if they did. It is in a way about whether it connected the people who were there to the God that we're worshiping. But the fundamental on who needs to like it is Odin needs to like it. How often in our life do we consider the choices that we make in terms of, does this make the gods proud? If the gods were here right now and heard me speak such and such a way, would they be proud of me or would they be ashamed of me? Man, here's what I'm wearing to bloat. Here's what I'm wearing to an event. Here's how I'm presenting myself. When the gods see me, are they impressed? Do they like what they see? Or are they disgusted? Do we ever even really think about that? I think a lot of the times we don't. When the gods witness something we do, our deeds, are they proud? Are they, do they shrug their shoulders or are they ashamed? Thinking in those terms is that reverent piety that we all need to have. We need to build within our mindset that we want to make our gods proud in who we are, in how we look, in how we act, in how we communicate, in the deeds that we do. We want our gods to be proud of us. And that is a huge distinction between people who are serious in their faith and hobbyists, is whether they internalize that and make that the standard they judge their life by. And in modern Asatru, that reverence and piety has been severely lacking. In the AFA, it has been growing tremendously over the years. And I'm very proud that it's at the highest point that it's ever been in the AFA. And I hope we keep moving forward that way. And I hope more and more of our members can internalize that into their lives and their families. Next up, Tracy asks, this is sort of off topic, but I wanted to ask what you guys think about frith versus grith, and how is it important as it applies to the AFA? Ali, what are your thoughts?
Something that's been very important in the stuff that I've been taught by Whit and Callahan especially has been, women are frith builders. That is our job. We build those connections between the folk. And I think there's a lot of emphasis on frith and building in the group as opposed to the grith and, peace with those opposing outside. So I don't have much to say about the grith, but I definitely think that women as frith weavers, we need to really focus on building those positive, beautiful connections, because that's what's going to keep people coming home. It's what's going to keep people that are home, and it's what's going to keep growing our communities and our families, is that peace and that connection.
So it's hard because the two concepts are very, very connected, and there's kind of a gray area within the AFA on that. It's hard for me to answer the question from an AFA member's perspective, maybe because it's a little bit different from a leadership perspective. But I think our folk don't understand those words, or they're often mistranslated. Frith is very often translated as frith equals peace, and it doesn't. It implies peace, but the mechanism of peace is very different. It's not that we need to be peaceful with everybody. It's that it is an enforced peace because someone that I share frith with is inviolable, and I should be inviolable to them. It is standing up for them if there is a problem and not allowing others to press on them in a bad way. And it's the assurance that they are also looking out for you. It's much more a mutual defense pact than it is just we'll kind of go along for the time of the event. No, it's an active piece. It's actively trying to ascribe, and in an AFA context, I think frith means actively applying, the best motives to anything that could be, unknown, giving people the benefit of the doubt. When we have the option of being contentious or getting along with a person, it's actively making the choice to let some stuff slide and to get along with them. And that's something that we owe our fellows within the AFA, is treating them that way. As far as rules of hospitality and generally being good neighbors, I think grith is very important, but within the AFA, we need to extend frith. We need to extend, we have all of our folk represented in the AFA. We have people of all different ages, of all different backgrounds. We've got members in 14 different countries. We've got people with dramatically different life experiences, and it's very easy to get grumpy about people that we don't know in real life, or that maybe we see only on the internet. And you can, in any kind of electronic communications, you can take things a lot of different ways. Depending on what kind of day we're having, we interpret tone into things that we have no reference point to understand someone's tone. And I think we all do that. Frith means to assume that they're being the best version of themselves they can be until you know otherwise. If there's a gray area, assume and take their side until you know that they're wrong. It doesn't mean to be completely blind to it, but it does mean to start from the default position of they're right and they meant everything the best possible way, and go from there. And I think that's easier said than done, but I think it's really important and very, very relevant in how we do things with the AFA. Ali mentioned earlier that it's a fundamental responsibility of our women to be frith weavers. Women have a tremendously powerful role to play in social dynamics. And we see this a lot. How women react to themselves and to men in groups influences how everyone else in that group sees those men and interacts. Women can be a catalyst for all kind of petty nonsense. And I think a lot of us have seen that, know that in our life experiences, but they also have the ability to smooth that kind of stuff over in a way that men can't. Women are in a unique position to build bonds amongst men that would normally be stubborn or have difficulty doing that. Women on the back end building those bridges and weaving that frith is such a valuable and special resource that we have. And you see that, many faith communities have that, the ability for the women behind the scenes to fix some of those things. We mentioned it in the context of relationships earlier with matchmaking and helping those things be successful. The women are really the key in that. And it's really special that our ladies in the AFA have taken such an active role in that lately. Matt, you said on a stream one time that you've played your fair share of video games. Any favorites? And have you played Elden Ring? I have not played Elden Ring. I don't know. Over time, sure, there's been tons of games that are fun. I wouldn't say I've played a lot of video games, but it's an easy thing to do to I don't know, if you're overwhelmed or you're stressed or you need to get your mind off of stuff for a little bit, it's a fun escape that way. I know I'm playing Diablo 4 right now. I'm in Act 4. I haven't beat it yet, so we'll see. I like Crusader Kings is a fun game. It's really nice that they incorporate Asatru in it, which is really special, and call it Asatru, and you can, spread the faith of Asatru and do things that way in it. It's kind of fun. I like a lot of different things at different times. It really depends. Bannerlord from Mountain Blade is really cool. I like that a lot. And I really like War of Rights, which is a Civil War game that's really well done with a lot of historical detail put into it. Matt and Ali, please explain what you think about spiritual energy and where does it come from? How does it flow from our mind/bodies and into the Haminya? Thank you. Ali, what are your thoughts on this?
Obviously I can't speak for the AFA, but for myself, I would have to say that a lot of your spiritual energy comes from within parts of your soul, and you're able to kind of direct that, whether that's consciously or subconsciously, and use that, whether that's in a magical context or just in a worship context, give part of that to the gods as part of your bloat or offering. And I think that anytime that you transfer that energy, whether that's, through emotions or magic or bloat or symbol, that's going to be when it goes out and goes into the Haminya.
So spiritual energy is such a broad topic, and it's like any other energy. I think it's generated and drawn from different sources. I think each of us as a spiritual inheritance from our gods, from Odin, Vili, and Ve, when they formed Aryan man, was a certain amount of spiritual energy that comes with that breath of life. And I think that we have that. I think we can enhance that and build upon that over time through deeds, through practice. One of the things that I've always said that is essential in our belief is that spiritual energy is a currency, and you can generate a better spiritual economy, for lack of a better term, by circulating that. So engaging in spiritual activity, the more you engage in ritual, the more you practice using your spiritual energy, the greater that pool of spiritual energy becomes. The more you gain recognition from our gods, the more you gain reputation and celebration from our folk, the greater the magnitude of the spiritual energy that you have. And we see that in a number of different ways. I think a lot of us can feel that in a person's magnetism when you're around them. If somebody has, if somebody has a presence to them, there's people that when they walk in the room, they have presence. That presence is a reflection of spiritual energy in a lot of ways. You see spiritual energy manifested in your ability to manipulate situations or win, positive reaction from people. You see spiritual energy when you see how animals relate to people. They always talk about how pets are such a good judge of character very often, because they experience the world through things that we don't see. They don't perceive things in the same way. They sniff out what kind of person you are through an entirely different set of categories and criteria than we do. And they pick up on that energy in a way that we typically don't. But you see that a lot. People with second sight can see, auras or spiritual energy emanating from a person. And so we transfer that through a lot of ways, but I think the most important way that that's transmitted is through will and through willed action. You consciously spend that on stuff that you do. And I think you subtly spend that unconsciously on things that you focused large amounts of your time or your energy towards. But you can consciously spend that on things that you want to do through ritual context and ritual behavior. And we see that primarily, we see that all the time, but that is one of the primary functions of bloat, is exchanging spiritual energy with our gods, of us pouring that into the horn, channeling that spiritual energy and sending it to them, and then asking them to bless us with spiritual energy in return. That cycle keeps that energy churning and refreshes that spiritual economy, as it were. I think that how spiritual energy transfers into Hamenya is, so I'm not an electrical engineer and I don't want to overextend the metaphors, but I think that to a degree that Hamenya is your batteries for your spiritual energy. I think that's where it is stored and becomes your reservoir of it. And I think that it transfers into that in a meaningful way the more willful your spiritual activity. I think you can pick up spiritual energy from a lot of different sources, and some of it just comes and goes. I think that of it that's stored and actually builds your Hamenya is done a lot through intent. And so I think when you're intentionally doing things, you're doing things certainly in a ritual context, it more efficiently builds Hamenya than if it happens by happenstance. Atheists and people that don't even conceive of their life in a spiritual way, they still have spiritual energy. I think because they don't intentionally cultivate it, their Hamenya is weaker than folks that don't have that or that do conceive of life in a spiritual way. By that same token, I think that people who aren't of our faith but are spiritual people build a Hamenya that is much bigger than an atheist because they have a context and a willful gathering of spiritual energy in a way that atheists don't. But there's still that initial spiritual energy that exists and that they pick up through, blindly stumbling through life. So I hope that addresses the question in the way that you meant it. When I asked for new questions, we just got overloaded with the questions here. So that's awesome. Thank you guys for your questions. 0% of that is a complaint in any way. It's really cool that all of a sudden all these questions appeared. Asatru no doubt has some Viking aesthetics and influence. When does it go too far and become LARPy? Can we still have Viking shields and similar decorations in group settings? So there's no perfect answer of when it becomes too LARPy. But it's one of those things is people generally know when it does. You can't draw a defining line on where it's LARPy and where it's not, but you smell it when it is, and everybody kind of gets it. And so I think there's an art to figuring that out. And sometimes, any of us may fall on either side of that. Obviously, some Viking themed elements of stuff are cool. Vikings are awesome. Many of us have Viking weapons that we'll have somewhere and, maybe have an axe on the wall or something. And that's cool. Dressing up and talking in a way that's completely unnatural takes people out of them. I think that's one of the big things about LARP as opposed to doing curious things from different times. It becomes LARPy when it is poorly received and is very out of place. And you see things that are just socially out of place all the time. when everybody's having a conversation on one wavelength and somebody brings up something completely random and it breaks the mood and everybody looks at them funny. You can do that with the LARPy stuff that you do. If you're in a group of reenactors and they're all doing LARPy things, they're all doing those kind of things, then obviously the tolerance for it is much higher. But you can still do strange, socially ignorant things in that context that make you appear LARPy even in the LARP group. So I don't think there's a good answer on that. I think common sense determines a lot of that. Obviously, when we do, ritual, we have, a horn that we drink out of. It'd be much easier just to drink out of a big cup or a glass or whatever else, or a mug. But it's not something that people look strangely at or find odd. So a lot of it just has to do with the social atmosphere that you're in and how off-putting your behavior or the strange Viking elements you're adding to things are. A lot of it has to do with how far you want to alienate yourself from the group dynamic. One of the most important things about Asatru is its community aspect. It's not an individual faith. It can be, but that's not what its intent is. That's not the fundamentals of its practice. It's fundamentally practiced within a community. So your reputation and how your peers in that community, well, not even just your peers, how anyone in that community judges you, how your betters view you, how your peers view you, how those below you view you, how your friends view you, and how your enemies view you. Your social context for what you do is important, and how far being an oddball you're trying to be. That's kind of the key on the LARPy deal, is when you move so far that your community looks at you strange, then you've become LARPy. There's an acceptable bounds, and you may not know where the line is, but you certainly know when you've crossed it, or at least other people in the room do. So social acuity is, I'd say, fundamental in figuring out what's LARPy and what's not. Ali, is there a path to bring more women to Asatru, in your opinion? What's your plan as a future folk builder, and how do you see the USA in 10 years? Thank you.
I think the path to bringing more women into Asatru is bringing more women into leadership, and we've been seeing that a lot lately. A lot of the people that are stepping up to become apprentice folk builders have been women, because we have such strong women already in leadership. I mean, it was Whit Callahan on this program talking about how Asatru is our birthright, that it was like, yeah, yes, it is. That makes a lot of sense, ma'am. So seeing those strong women and creating more strong women to lead other women home is going to be a big key for that. I can only see us growing in the next 10 years, though. Not only just adding more women, but more children. We have so many babies born in the last few years. In 10 years, some of those kids that have been born into the Asatru Folk Assembly are going to be old enough to start families of their own. So we're gonna be seeing generational growth in 10 years, and that's incredible.
All right. Ali and Matt, I know this may be a personal question, but do you have a personal altar in your home? What type of items do you keep on your altar, and how do you put it to use in your daily life? Ali, tell us about your personal altar practice, please.
Okay. I have two. We have our ancestor altar, which is in one corner of the living room, and then we've got my altar, which is on the big bookshelf. Generally, at any time, I have the candle lit from the folk flame at Baldershoff, incense, little trinkets that mean something, whether that's, it reminds me of an ancestor or someone I'm hoping to call upon, or a god. I keep my runes there. I keep things from past events. I've got a piece of the ship from the Feast of the Anheriar. I've got my flower crown. I've got, I can't remember exactly what it is, but I've got something from Yule at Baldershoff. So I keep all of that stuff together, keep it, in a special area on the altar. And generally every day I do the Fulcrum chant 9 times over the flame from Baldershoff, and pray as needed, I guess.
So yeah, I have an altar here in my office. I'm actually looking at it now. It's on the other side of the room. Used to be out in the main area of the house, but as my daughter grew, it's a fun thing to reach up and grab stuff off of. So we've had to move where it's located. That was one of the first things that I did when I came home to Asatru was establish an altar in my house, and I've always had one. It eventually, it got way too crowded with stuff, so I have kind of a number of boxes of where stuff is, and different stuff's on the altar at different times, depending on the season or depending upon, what I think needs to be there at the time. I've got God statues on the altar. I have various candles, for different reasons. I've got a resin incense burner on there that I'd like to burn some resin incense on over a tea light. I've actually got that going right now. I have my runes on it, and it depends. If there's something that I'm specifically going to use in ritual that I want to, be charged by being on the altar, I'll set it there for a while beforehand. I also have a big brass shallow bowl that he uses as an offering plate or as an offering bowl. I have that there. How do I use it? It really depends. I come before it and light candles and say prayers often. I'll sit before it and meditate and do, runic meditation, either in general or directed at a purpose from time to time. Haven't done that in a little while. It's a good reminder. I should probably do some more of that. I most often just come before it in prayer and make little offerings of incense or of, sharing a drink of something. In thanks or in affirmation, I like to come before my altar and give thanks for things often. And if I'm going to do something, or if I want the God's blessing on things that I have in mind that I want to do, I'll come there and ask for their guidance in that. Sometimes I'll come before my altar to reaffirm things, reaffirm my commitment to certain things, reaffirm my loyalty, to reaffirm things that I've made commitments to from time to time. And I think that's most often what I do with my altar. So a different situation initially, the way my house is set up, there's this angled staircase with 2 flights of stairs. And in the, foyer area where the staircase makes its bend is where my altar was. And I have all the pictures of my ancestors up and down the staircase. So sometimes I'll go stand in that middle landing between the top stairs and the bottom stairs and address my ancestors. And that's a little bit different. That's typically something that I would do at my altar because it was kind of all connected. But since they're not, I will go there and say things to the ancestors. Sometimes just say good morning, especially if I've got my daughter with me, or give thanks or things that way. So that's usually what I do with my altar practice. Ali, what is your favorite event?
My favorite event that I've been to so far was the Feast of the End Harrier in Oklahoma. It was my first event. It was really great. I got to meet some incredible people. And just meeting Steve McNallen for the first time was just the coolest experience of my life. So,
All right. Ali, you look beautiful and your skin is absolutely glowing. Do you have any special self-care rituals you can share?
Oops. Sorry about that. My cat just laid on the cord that my phone's connected to, so it keeps knocking it over. But none in particular. I meditate, like when I'm washing my hair and stuff, because it takes a while. So I kind of like think on the same mantra. Besides that, I can credit Dr. Bronner's.
All right. Okay, Ali, let's hear about those 5 favorite war movies.
Now I'm not huge on war movies. I think maybe they misunderstood when I said horror movies.
They did,
But
and I think that's why. I think that's the inside joke. But we're welcome to hear your 5 favorite war movies if you got it.
I watched Band of Brothers and I bawled like a baby, so I don't really watch war movies like that anymore. My grandfather was actually in the Pacific, so I've never tried to watch anything on that realm because I'd rather that part of his life stay a mystery to me.
All right. Matt, what does the AFA do in terms of prison outreach? Not a lot right now, but more than we've ever done previously. One of the big challenges has always been just the issue of locality, finding. So I'm trying to think of the best place to start on this. Anyways, when I became Moss Harrier Gothi, I really wanted to tackle this perennial question of how to best do prison ministry. So I wanted to answer all these letters that we would get. And then I looked at the letters, and the letters were never about anything. They were about wanting products. Not that that's good, bad, or otherwise, but they were either, hey, do you have free stuff you can send me? Or, hey, do you have a catalog where I can buy stuff? But it was very stuff related. And I still think that's a good thing for us to get better at doing, is having that accessibility where inmates could order stuff from our website. But beyond that, I wanted to figure out ways that we could help folks inside that want to actually practice our faith with their spiritual practice. And that's been a harder thing. That ends up having to make the connection with Asatru practitioners in a facility reaching out, and us having a Gothi or a Githya close enough to facilitate that. And that's still kind of hard to come by. I've gone several times now out to High Desert Prison to do some bloat with the guys in there and stumble with the guys in there and just talk to them about Asatru and answer questions. I'd like to do more of that. There's also another facility in California that is, a couple hours drive from me that I think I can, go to and try to help some guys in there if they'd, like to listen. One of the other things that we do is we sponsor feasts. One of the things that guys in there get to do is have religious meals a certain number of times per year. But in order to do it, they need an outside organization to sponsor it. And doesn't mean to fund it. Like, they raise all the money themselves. And I don't really understand this redundancy in the system, but it's like they've got to send the money to us and then us send the money back to them to make the purchase of the food. And so we've facilitated that now a couple of times, and we're very open to doing that often. That's a really easy thing we can do that I think helps them quite a bit. It's been really special to go in the times that I have and just be treated like a colleague by the chaplaincy there. That's a nice feeling. And the guys there really appreciated my coming out the times that I've been, and it was a really positive experience. I wasn't really sure what to expect. That prison has not been any part of my life experience, so I wasn't really sure what that was like, and it was much more positive than I guess I worried it might be, and it was really kind of a pleasant experience every time that I've done that. So I look forward to some more of that in the future. The other thing that we're working on right now is getting this show, Victory Never Sleeps, accessible on their, I don't know the right lingo, but on their devices that they have that they can download podcasts and music and things on. We're currently in the process trying to get this as one of their options. So we're going to keep pushing on that until we make it happen. I think that's going to be a really important thing. Nick threw up our prison ministry fund. If anybody wants to donate towards that, the information is up on the screen. So there you go. What would you say to an atheist to sell them on Asatru? And would you say that convincing atheists to become Asatru is harder than convincing people with religious backgrounds? What would I say? I don't know. It depends on the atheist and it depends on the conversation. I think that, I did a whole, and you can find it on our YouTube channel. I'm not sure if that's where you're watching this tonight or not, but if you go to our YouTube channel, you can find an interview I did with an atheist gentleman who had me on his program and wanted to talk to me about Asatru. So that's what I would say to that particular, that's what I did say to that particular atheist about Asatru. It really depends what's going to work with them or not. I think that if it depends on the person who's having the conversation. If they genuinely want to know and are open to the possibility of it, it's a very different conversation than if they're just trying to argue with you. If they're going into it that they're right and that you're wrong, and they're just trying to counterpoint with you, I think you can do that easier with somebody who is a person of faith. It's much harder to do that with an atheist. Because I think it's very easy for atheists to deny spiritual experience. And I think it's much easier for a person who's experienced spirituality to see that in different contexts or to speak in those terms. Whereas very often atheists aren't open to accepting or understanding that at all. I think one of the things that I've found more useful with atheists is talking about religion as mankind's default as opposed to the other way around. Atheists always want to put the burden of proof on us as if the default position is no religion and that I need to prove to them that there is a God or gods. I need to prove to them that the metaphysical is real. I need to prove those things. And sometimes it's useful to inform them and demonstrate to them that that's not the case. Religion has been a fundamental to mankind since science has been able to recognize us as such. Ceremonial burial and religious practice is a fundamental to cave art, to basically any expansion of the human mind and human development in our very long history has been coupled with religiosity and an experience of the metaphysical. When talking about it in terms of its integral function in mankind since the beginning, if they're willing to accept the truth of those things, then it makes it a much more productive conversation. It's interesting to me, and I don't know if again, it all depends on a person's willingness to have a real discussion. But one of the things I've seen atheists do is recognize how awesome religion is and how much you need religion, and then trying to recreate that in a non-religious context, and at least recognizing that that doesn't work. I have a friend from high school that does that. He sees all of the beautiful, tangible things that religion provides. And, it's almost like he wants to have a church of atheism. We should build cool atheism monuments. We should unite around atheism. But it misses a fundamental in existence, that you don't build lasting things around disbelief in something or around negation of something. You build lasting beliefs and lasting tradition around things that you're for, things that you celebrate, about worshiping something, not about how much we don't worship something. So you build it in a positive way. You can't build it in a negative way. And I think that's useful. But again, sometimes you have to wait for life to crack that heart open. Sometimes atheists just have to hit a point in their own life where they recognize a spiritual need, or where they have an experience they can't put in an atheist context. And when they're open-minded, then it can be a very fruitful discussion to have. But it's hard other than that, because especially somebody who identifies as an atheist, they have built their self-identity around the concept of negating faith. And so it's very hard to get one of those people to truly be open in a conversation. Would I say a person of faith is easier to have the conversation with? Absolutely. Because they're used to talking about spirituality in those terms. They understand the concept of belief, the concept of the metaphysical, shifting from what they are familiar with as far as religion to what we practice is a much easier road than going from no religion to a life based around religion. So that's my thought on that. But do check out that video if you'd like. I thought it was a really interesting discussion. Will there ever be any Hofs built overseas, like in Australia or Sweden? Yes, absolutely there will be. When that will happen, that is the question. It's not an if, but a when. In order for that to happen, we need to build stable and sizable populations of AFA members' places. One of the hardest things that we experience internationally is getting people to stick around long enough for it to grow. They see the things that we have in the United States and they want that for their country. They look around and don't see it, and they give up too easy. And that's a really easy thing to do. We all do that. Working in the bar industry, I'd always see that. If it's dead, it stays dead. Once it starts being, happening, then everybody wants to be there. It takes those first people to sit down and have a drink and stay put for a while for other people to see that there's people in there and come in, and eventually it grows. But if this place is dead, I'm going to go to the next spot, it never takes off. So we're waiting for those very motivated pioneers in these places to sit down and have a drink for a while and stay there. And we can build from that momentum. But that's one of the big things that we need is international people that want to actually build a community where they're at, instead of expect one to have magically sprouted there before their time. And that's way easier said than done. I get it, but that's what we're waiting on. And then once that community is big enough to warrant their own Hof and has tested leadership that are able to care for and maintain a Hof, because the challenge isn't anymore getting the Hof. It's getting the Hof and maintaining it and taking care of it and making it a thriving institution. Once we have a Hof somewhere, we've made a commitment, and we can't, everybody's left the area, so we're going to shut the doors. No, once we've made a Hof to one of our gods, we owe it to that god to maintain this as an active temple for them forever. And that means we need a sizable population there to keep it up and running and take care of it. Hmm. Does the idea of good and evil exist in Asatru? Seems like the sagas have some anti-heroes that just do what needs to be done without judgment. Yes, good and evil absolutely exists. Um, the sagas weren't written as religious treatises. They're things that we get a glimpse at the religion that the characters in the sagas practice. But the sagas weren't written as religious texts. They were written as stories of interesting people and of heroes and of sometimes outlaws, which are antithetical to our faith system, but are interesting people to tell stories about, which is what a saga is. Um, but yeah, the sagas give us a glimpse in how Asatru is practiced in the days of the characters in the sagas, but the sagas aren't gospels. They're not written as religious text. There's absolutely good and evil. Most of the time, people find themselves uncomfortable saying that. So what we say more often is chaos versus order, because it explains the two polarities in a broader context, I'd say. Um, but there's honorable and dishonorable. And I think that's one of the bigger things. There's noble and ignoble. And the comparing and contrasting between two polarities is absolutely something that exists in Asatru. What some of the confusion is that people some searching for the best words to describe this. And I think it's one of the reasons that we use the term Asatru and not Norse pagan. We define ourselves by being true or loyal to the Aesir. Norse pagan, in its broadest context, means you accept Norse cosmology, but it doesn't align you with any forces in that. That's like if you are a Judean monotheist, maybe you worship the devil, maybe you worship demons, maybe you, just because you conceive of the world in that mythos doesn't align yourself with a right or a wrong or a person or a direction. If you are a Christian, you've aligned yourself with Christ. You buy that cosmology and that mythos, and amongst that, you are a follower of Christ. If you're a Judean monotheist, maybe you worship the devil. I don't know. In Asatru, you have aligned yourself with the Aesir. You've aligned yourself with the gods of order versus the forces of chaos. If you're a Norse pagan of some stripe, then it's a term that really doesn't have a meaning outside of that you accept the broad myth cycle of that cosmology is existing and being relevant. But yeah, by aligning ourselves with the Aesir, we draw a line between noble and honorable and ignoble and dishonorable. And, roughly that's the difference between good and evil. One of my favorite heroes is Elsie Christensen. Was she ever influenced by Mills' writings? Allie.
Yes. Yes, she was. She read in the 1960s, she read a lot of his works and decided to expand upon that and build a little bit closer to what we consider Asatru today. But yes, the Odinic Fellowship was definitely based on his writings, but she felt they might be a little too Masonic.
Yeah, so that was one of the few people that their lives, overlapped during a time period that she could look to that wow, there's another person practicing something similar to what I think we should be practicing. Like, that's a strange occurrence around that time because they were separated by so much space. But she actually had a contemporary in Mills that was doing Asatru. And I think that all of the sources that I have say that was very fundamental in Elsie's spiritual development. Has membership increased? Has AFA membership increased since the riots in Europe? No, it hasn't. As a matter of fact, we haven't had a European applicant in a little while. And I'm not quite sure what that is. I don't know if they're super busy over there. I mean, we get applicants all the time, so I can't say whether the riots in Europe have caused those applicants to, make that move to officially join the AFA or not. But nobody has mentioned that as a reason for joining yet. Matt, can you elaborate more on your theory of Hyperborea being the origin of the Aryan tribes? Any sources I can read up on? Yes. Source-wise, I mean, there's lots of various stuff, but it's hard to pick one particular piece that was all about it that you can get stuff out of. There's little pieces that you get here and there, but one that I would recommend is Arctic Homeland in the Vedas by Baal Tilak, I believe. And he's an Indian gentleman that writes about that and how the imagery used in the Vedic literature it implies geographic things that you don't experience on the Indian subcontinent. You only experience much further north. A lot of that has to do with the changing of seasons, with the lengths of winters, with different things that way. One of the ideas that I heard pushed forward is in the original understanding of Ganesh, that rather than an elephant head, he had like a woolly mammoth head. And I think that's just always been kind of fascinating to me. I don't hang my hat on that theory-wise. I just think it's interesting. Yeah, you see a lot of our symbolism just seems geared and oriented that way. A lot of what we see archaeologically as migration patterns tend to come out of the north, out of, as if glaciation pushed people out of an area further north down into other things, down into other places. You see that with the commonality between Aryan tribal expansion and old Europe populations, and the similarity that they're clearly the same race of people divergent at a very early time, whereas you don't see that in other more southern populations of people. But again, I'm not pushing that too hard as dogma. I just think that the things tend to suggest that when we look at deeper in our lore and our archaeology and in our history. And so that's, I am most convinced that that is where our people come from. But yeah, check out Arctic Homeland in the Vedas by Tilak. Do you know of anyone in the modern era who has suffered more because of their belief in folkish Asatru than Alexander Rud Mills? It's an interesting question that makes me stop and think. No, I don't. I say that with kind of an asterisk. I'm still going to say no, but there are some people who their exes have used Asatru as a reason to deny them visitation and time with their children. And I think that hits in a different way than what Mills experienced. And I don't know of any real specific case of that where that's been the deciding factor in a way that's, completely robbed someone of their rights to interact with their children. But that's kind of one area that hits very different that he wasn't exposed to. But no, I don't think anybody has suffered the level of, people have gotten over their doxing and other things much quicker than he got out of his internment camp. I don't think there's anybody in modern times who's suffered more for our faith than Alexander Rud Mills. Thoughts on Wicca and other New Agey pagan practices? Do you think it's valid, and can it have crossover with Asatru? What are your thoughts on that, Ali?
Strong. I do not like Wicca. I do not suggest it to anybody. I suggest against it. It was basically created by a sexual pervert, someone that we would not allow into the AFA if he were to apply. So if that gives you kind of the basis of where it's centered and why it's bad. To answer anything about crossover, yes, a little bit. We do have Sade practice, and some of that stuff was taken and put into Wicca and the New Agey magic stuff, magic with a K and all that. There is some crossover there, and I think if you're familiar with Wicca, when you actually learn Sade work, you're going to learn that a lot of the stuff you were taught is somewhat correct. You're halfway there. But no, I would warn against Wicca for everybody.
Yeah, No, but I think that the points of commonality have deeper roots than that. I think that Wicca is, first, I don't think that its roots are particularly legitimate. The eclecticism kind of ruins the good that could be taken of any of the sources they draw their eclecticism from. The lacking of any cultural context to understand the little things that they draw from just makes it all hokey. But the same sources that they draw from are very often valid and good things. A lot of the Western ceremonial magic that they draw from does have overlap in how people practice various things and does have application when we look into Asatru. But that doesn't come from Wicca. They just both kind of come from similar predating sources. Wicca itself is hokey and extremely degenerate. And I understand that people, find what they find first. And I get that. I don't fault anyone for exploring that, but no, I think Wicca's all bad.
It's very disingenuous. He just flitted through the entire world. You can't mishmash our stuff with ancient Egypt. You just can't.
No, Wicca is very juvenile. Mary asks, while on the subject of video games, is there one on our people versus the Romans? Yeah, absolutely. You could do that in a lot of different games. I think Lou over on the side mentioned Rome Total War. You don't have to play as the Romans. You can play as any number of Celtic, Germanic, and Slavic tribes and war against the Romans. I'm sure there's probably plenty that have similar themes, but that's the one that I can think of off the top of my head. The next question. Is there a way to get rid of demons or evil spirits that may reside in one's house in Asatru? Yeah, absolutely. I think there are lots of ways to do that. I think the best way, if it is a real bad situation, is to have one of our Gothar come and do that and be involved in that process. There is a number of different rituals that can happen, but it's really hard to go into the detail on them without a lot of specifics. And I think a lot of things have to do with the spiritual might of the people who are in the house and the people performing the ritual. And and things that way. It's really complex, and it's a pretty deep theological thing to just discuss on the random. So it's hard to give the answers that I think are really necessary because they really depend on the specifics. But yes, there's absolutely ways to chase bad things out of your house. And I think, like I said, the best thing to do is to get one of our Gothar involved in that. Can you talk about Loki, Fenrir, and the Jotuns, and how each of these entities can manifest themselves in our lives and in our world? How can one tell these forces apart? And how can we protect ourselves from chaotic forces? So, I think that, again, context is everything on how to recognize these things in the world. I think you see it very often, the most clearly, obviously, with people who identify with those forces. It's really easy, and it smacks you in the face, perhaps literally, if somebody comes up and is a Lokian. Oh, okay. And you can conceptualize that very easily. Other ways you can see that and pick up on that is when you see our folk acting in ways that are based around the baser instincts of their character as opposed to based around nobility. When you see people, and this is a tendency within our folk, and I think that this is a place you can really see it, is when there's some folks that no matter what situation they're in, they have to be divisive and disruptive. No matter what group they're a part of, they've got to try to tear it down or cause a problem or cause a split or cause a rift. And I think it is a particularly prevalent problem that we see in our folk and in the circles that likely most people in the AFA and most people in our chat audience are involved in. You've got people that nothing is good enough. In their head, they have this idea of how their perfect version of things should be, and they will find every possible reason why everything everyone else is doing is wrong or can't work or shouldn't work or isn't the right way to do it. And they perpetuate the crab in the bucket mentality. I think that's the biggest thing about the forces of chaos that you recognize is when you see a tendency of people who every time something is going right for us, they try to pull it down. Whatever us might be in that occasion, whenever something good's happening, there's a group of negative people that just want to be negative Nancy about it and try to pull it down. That's how I think you see those forces manifesting around us. The best defense against that, and I think that it is, I think it may not be the answer that some folks are looking for. I think people want some kind of, hoodoo. They want some kind of like spell that you can do or some talisman you can wear or some chant you can do that chases that away. Realistically, what you do is you build your Haminya and you build your luck literally through consistent acts of nobility in your life. Through living your life with nobility and dignity on how you do things, you guard yourself against a lot of stuff. You build your spiritual armor, and you're much better able to withstand the snipings of chaotic forces, be them human or metaphysical, and carry on with what you're doing. Also, you're able to combat them best when you build and you have a strong relationship with our gods through consistent bloat, consistent altar work, consistent and enthusiastic interaction with the Asatru Folk Assembly. You build a relationship with our gods, a powerful relationship with our gods, is by far the best thing I can recommend to steer your life in the right direction and to protect you from forces of chaos. Meditation is generally seen as an Eastern thing, but does it have a place in Asatru? And is there an Asatru, or is there an Asatru equivalent? Of course there is. I think that you can call concepts lots of different things. I think a lot of the meditation that you see in the East comes through Aryan migration and is an Aryan thing. I think when you see, now obviously it evolves as it goes from a Vedic culture to a more what we consider a modern Hindu culture, and then into Buddhism and other things. But Buddha himself was an Aryan. He was an Aryan prince. His meditation was a high caste Indian thing at a time where they were still very closely aligned with their Aryan roots. And I think it's absolutely Aryan in its history. But I think that we think of many different things when we talk about meditation. And I don't think maybe you do meditation in Asatru the same way you would in a different context. But I think that, the similarities are close enough to say, yeah, sure, you can meditate in Asatru the same way. I think what a lot of folks, myself specifically, as opposed to doing Sanskrit mantras, I like to do runic Galder for my meditation. But I think it's fundamentally very similar. One thing that I think is really important in a Western context as opposed to an Eastern context, one of the biggest things that separates us is will or not, and embracing life or not. We're not meditating to transcend or escape life. We're not meditating to merge with oneness or with nothingness. We are meditating to empower our luck, to empower our hamenya, to affect a situation, to build a closer relationship with our gods, to make ourselves mentally stronger or better prepared for a conflict. But our meditation is focused towards doing and achieving as opposed to towards renouncing and letting go, if that makes sense. And again, you can meditate for a number of reasons. So that's not as black and white as I said it, but I think those themes are what really separate the two practices. Matt, a person accused the AFA of being socialist. Told them I could not speak for the AFA as I'm not a leader. However, the AFA is not communist or socialist and did not support those ideologies. Yeah, they'd have to be specific on what they mean. Those are also words that are just political buzzwords that set people off. No, we're not communists. Communists mean a certain thing. Are there socialist elements in the sense that we want to take care of our own? Absolutely. I think every faith has that. In the idea that we want to, provide things to take care of our elderly, to take care of our community, to have our folk services program. Those things are all, I guess, technically socialist things. Our governing structure of the AFA is not socialist at all, but our concern for the well-being of our folk absolutely is. But again, those things require context to have meaning. We absolutely have socialist elements to the AFA amongst our folk and our people. But when you compare it to the United States as a whole, the AFA and AFA members tend to be anti-socialist policies because they don't help our people. They disproportionately help other groups of people and not our folk. So, I mean, when you ask why people have an issue with socialism, if it's an issue of economics, religions and churches have always served that element. And that's the fact that they do, and the fact that religions fundamentally provide charity is the reason that they're granted a tax exemption, is because on a very fundamental level, even in America, the home of capitalism, churches were always the social safety net to care for the elderly, to care for the poor, to care for providing for folks that are on hard times. So I mean, it depends what your friends say when they ask that, but I think it's kind of a false proposition. Matt, are you familiar with the ancient civilization theory of Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock? They believe 13,000 years ago, meteors raised sea levels and flooded a semi-advanced civilization. Yes, I am with Graham Hancock, yes. With the other gentleman, no. I'm not very I think this is the first time I can think of hearing his name, but Graham Hancock, absolutely. I think that's fascinating. I don't know what to make of it. I think prehistoric civilization and prehistoric discovering of the Americas is fascinating. I got hooked on the Graham Hancock thing, and I downloaded every one of his books that's on Audible, and I just went through like back to back to back over a period of time, listening to him while I was driving and while I was in the gym and whatever else. And no, I absolutely love it. I think it's fascinating. I think it's hard to draw specific conclusions. I think Graham Hancock, because he doesn't share my worldview, draws some different conclusions about races and origins of some of these early civilizations of folks. But I really find that fascinating. And like I say, I eat that stuff up. Ali, what are your thoughts? Are you familiar with either of the two gentlemen or their theories about ancient civilizations?
I am. I find it very fascinating. I don't know where I stand on it because it's just a little too outside of my base knowledge, but I definitely find it very, very fascinating. Like I mentioned earlier when I was talking about my favorite books, Forbidden Archaeology is one of my favorite books. I love that sort of thing, that idea that there could have been something before us. And I mean, we know that our myths work in cycles. Why not the rest of the world?
So, and that's a thing with so many of this, and even, Graham Hancock, I'm not sure about the other gentleman, but he doesn't. Yes, I agree with him as far as there is absolutely something. There were absolutely ancient civilizations that did stuff that is outside of the timeline accepted by modern scholarship. That happened. That's a thing. So I believe that's absolutely fact. What that means, what that implies the nature of that civilization is harder to say. Whatever that was, did these different places in the earth around that time have contact to a much greater degree than currently accepted theories say they do? Yes, absolutely, that's true. What that means, I don't know, other than they absolutely had contact. So there's some things that I absolutely do buy into for sure. It's just the bigger what it all means. But it's fascinating, and I really am very eager to learn all I can about that, the more of that's discovered. From Nick, I know we speak on community and coming home so often. I see so many stubborn, my words, Nick's words, people out there that keep thinking that what they're doing is good enough and that they don't have the time, work too much, focus on their family, that there's no one nearby, that they don't have to join. They don't see why solitary practice or just focusing on the two people they know and not focusing on something bigger, something that can actually do something, accomplish, build something. everyone loves a one-liner or a quotable quote. Give us something apt about all that for Sarah's wisdom of the Altair Gothi posts. I can't do that, Nick. I'm not a trained monkey. I can't create quotes for you. I really can't when I'm on the spot. I wish I could. I think that I've probably had a decent quotation on that time, a time or two. Hopefully folks can find those, or if I've said one that was worthwhile, awesome, I hope. But that is really important, and I wish those people would get it together. There is a self-centeredness in the world that so many of us have grown up in and that we're surrounded by. And it's a deep conditioning that's very, very hard to break. Most of us in this day and age didn't grow up in a tight-knit religious community. Some did, but I think most of us didn't. It certainly wasn't the norm in my day. And I know a lot of people listening are, 20 years younger than myself. Especially and I assume most people are listening to this in the West. If we have some Eastern Europeans, they may see this very differently, and they may have a very different phenomenon. But I think when we live in very diverse places, diversity is directly negatively correlated with patriotism or nationalism or group cohesion. The more diverse something is, the less connected it is to the things that everyone has in common, because everyone doesn't have those things in common. We get to a point with diversity where what you have in common is physical location, but nothing else. And that could be, racial diversity. It could be religious diversity. It could be a lot of things, but it's all of those things in the West today, and that makes it hard. So we have people that grew up, they didn't necessarily grow up in a neighborhood where they knew everybody knew everybody's parents, kids played in the street. We don't see that very often anymore. Most likely they weren't raised in a church where once a week, at least, if not several times a week, you have a faith community of people who share your beliefs, who share your religion, who share your worldview. So they're just out for them and their family, and that's good enough. And they try to squeak by with whatever, pays the bills, and that's just good enough. People don't dream anymore or think towards the future. And that said, something else that we've, at least in America, this is a huge thing, and I'm sure it displays itself a little bit different in different parts of the world, but we used to pride ourselves on our, ingenuity and our individual empowerment to take action and seize our dreams and do things in America. We don't have that anymore. We always, for various reasons, society has taught us that you don't do that. Somebody else does that, and then you follow along. So I think people wait until they have nice things that someone else has created for them, and then they get to celebrate the nice things without any of the cost or any of the difficulty in building them. I think that's what we see with a lot of folks that don't want to join. They would join if we had a thriving AFA community in their area, but people are too far away. So rather than building the AFA in their area and make it happen, they're going to wait around until somebody else does it for them, and then they can join and be part of it. Something else I say to the argument that they work too much, they can't go to things, but their family. Your life shouldn't conflict with your religion. You should structure your life to where all the aspects of your life work together. I can see if you have a particular career that makes it challenging, but if you don't, if you just have a job, get a job that allows you to attend the things at the Hoff, or attend moots, or do things with your family and do things with your church. Structure your life around it if it's important to you. If the AFA is important to you. You should never, I got to spend too much time with my family. No, your family needs to be involved in your religion. You're doing it wrong if you have to choose between doing religious things or doing family things. The two should be one and the same. You can choose how you want to structure your life, but what it comes down to with all of those people is it's just not that important to them. And that boils down to what I've talked about all night, is the idea of piety and how we need to have a genuine and real faith in our gods, to evaluate our life in terms of, is what I'm doing making our gods proud? I don't think people who answer, who say any of the arguments that you threw out there, Nick, I don't think that any of those people conceive of the world in that way. And if they do, I certainly don't think they're being honest with themselves if they ask what the gods would think of the choices that they've made. Will there be another episode with Stephen McNallen? That's up to Steve. He's welcome on the show anytime he'd like to be here. We'd certainly love to have him on again. It was a really nice episode last time. So, I know he's got a lot of things going on, but, like I said, I'd be glad to have him back on whenever he'd like to be on. Ali, what's next in Nebraska? And what's next for the awesome Claussens?
Our next event, I guess, if we want to take that route, our next event is going to be Cigarblot. We're doing that in collaboration with Travis Bodish and Nick Salo from Colorado. It's going to be out in Scotts Bluff. It's going to be incredible. We're going to do Voton on the Peaks on the top of the bluff. We're going to do an ancestor dedication on part of the Oregon Trail, which was so important to so many of our ancestors. And then after that, we're branching out. We are leaving Nebraska for a little bit. We're doing a Kansas City moot, and we're doing one in Wichita. So everybody else look out.
That's exciting. It's really nice to see some activity in that part of the country. There was a big lack of it for a long time. Matt and Ali, have you seen or are a fan of Robert Seffer, the world's most dangerous anthropologist? I have no idea what you're talking about, but I am intrigued. And when we get off this show, I'll absolutely look him up. What are your thoughts, Ali?
I've never heard of him, but I will be doing the same.
Yeah, I'm really curious what where that particular rabbit hole leads. And the last question I got tonight is Reno/Fernley a good place to live and to be able to visit the California AFA site? Yes, it's awesome. I love it here. I love it here. I love it here. If I was going to continue to live as just one household among the masses, there's no place I'd rather do it. I'm excited to move to Tennessee for Sigerheim because I'm going to be part of building an AFA community there. I'm going to be part of living in that community, and that makes all the difference. But as far as, just a place for you and your family to live, Reno is wonderful. I can't say enough good about it. Fernley puts you, a little bit further out there, but it depends on how close you want to be. If you're in Reno, you're about 2.5 hours from the Hof, from Odenshof. If you're in Fernley, you're probably, 3.5, 3.25. But it's still something very doable once a month. But yeah, no, I love it here. I can't say enough good about it. It's a great place it's a great place to live. It's a great place to be. The climate is really nice. You get, maybe not in Fernley as much, but in Reno, you're right by the mountains there. You're right by the Sierras. You get snow, but not so much snow it's obnoxious and you have to shovel it, but you got snow frequently throughout the winter. It gets nice and cold. In the summer, it gets nice and hot, but it stays dry and isn't humid. So yeah, it's a great place to be. Looks like a couple more questions came in. So I lied. That was not our last question. Speaking of Nick Salo, Matt, could you please let everyone know that there is a fundraiser to help the Salos with medical bills? Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, if you could throw the link up there. I couldn't even get it out of my mouth before he had it up there. Yeah, if you guys want to donate and help them out, Nick Salo is a folk builder for the AFA out of Colorado. He has been part of a huge resurgence of membership, or I guess not resurgence. We've never had a great deal of membership there. So a huge surge in membership in Colorado in that area. He's been doing great things for us. He's had a lot of responsibilities with him and his family, and he's currently going through some health problems. And the family could really use your help. Like I say, he's supporting a lot of people, and money's always a challenge. So if you guys find yourself a little bit of extra and you want to help him out, there is a link to do so.
And do make sure that you're saying prayers for his recovery. If
absolutely,
you get a second too.
I want to let people know that they don't necessarily know about the AFA. Specifically ran by Our Ladies. We have a prayer group for people who are struggling with health stuff called the Circle of Air. And that's something that's very active. I don't think we talk about it enough, but if you have folks or you yourself are dealing with health problems, please reach out to our Githias or any of your folk builders. They can pass you that direction. But it is something that, I think has had a real positive effect on the health of our members. And it's a nice thing to do, a nice thing to be a part of. And then perhaps the real last question, Matt and Allie, thoughts on Jared Taylor and the American Renaissance? Allie, do you have thoughts on Jared Taylor and American Renaissance?
Not really. I stay out of all of that sort of thing now. I had my time in the political deal there, and I'm over it.
In broad strokes, I like him. I like that group, that conference, that sphere. Yeah, I don't have a lot of specific views on that other than I like it in general. I like some of the aesthetic. I like some of the tone. I wish more people involved in that would focus on things that they can do as opposed to either ethereal things that don't really affect the real world in any way, or things that maybe somebody out there somewhere should do, but they're not doing. I think it's very easy to spend all of our time railing against big picture things that we can't access. And it would be really nice to see more of an emphasis put on things that we do have access to fix and make better. And it'd be nice if a lot of the folks that put energy towards things like that could put their energy in a way that was going to be productive towards their goals for their family, for their children, for their future. Finding ways for those things to be accessible is always the big challenge. And I think we got a lot of thinkers out there. It would be nice to have some doers on building community, on building things that help their family. And I'd like to see more of that from that particular crowd. And that's it for tonight. Thank you guys so much for the great questions. When I asked for more questions, I got 2 hours worth of more questions. I appreciated that. It was great to have you on, Allie.
Thank you.
Alexander Rud Mills was awesome. I think it was well researched and people learned a lot of stuff they didn't know. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really great. Like I said at the start, it's really nice to help wrap up the first year because it really did bring us home. So
awesome. Well, I love hearing that. If you guys are out there and you're listening, you like what we do, you like where we're coming from, I would encourage you guys to go to runestone.org and join the AFA. Be part of it. Be part of making this happen. We need all the folks we can get to help build the future that we want. So till next week, hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember, victory never sleeps.